In 1981, a Japanese man named Issei Sagawa moved to Paris in order to pursue a PhD. While attending Sorbonne University, Sagawa befriended 25-year-old Renee Hartfeldt, a Dutch woman also studying at the college. On the 11th of June, Sagawa would invite Renee over to his apartment to have dinner and complete a school assignment together. Renee would accept this offer, but unfortunately, Sagawa had other plans, and before the end of the night, Renee would be dead, and Sagawa would consume several parts of her body, earning him the nickname, the Kobe Cannibal. Born on April 26, 1949, Sagawa would be born prematurely in Kobe, Japan. Despite having wealthy parents, his less than pristine health resulted in Sagawa being what he himself described as weak, ugly, and small, standing at only 4 feet 9 inches, 144.8 centimeters. This ultimately led Sagawa to develop an interest in cannibalism, with him saying at one point that he believed consuming parts of a person could help him gain their energy. As a result, he began to target individuals he believed possessed characteristics he lacked, namely health and beauty. It was this attraction that led him to pursue a German woman home one night while he was attending Wako University in Tokyo. Although it is unclear if this woman was a student, at just 24 years old, Sagawa followed her home and broke into her house while she slept. Sagawa stated that he was attempting to cannibalize the woman. In fact, he had hoped to steal a part of her flesh, presumably without her waking up, only she did. And being considerably tall, or at the very least taller than Sagawa, she easily overpowered him and pushed him to the ground. Shortly thereafter, Sagawa was arrested and accused of attempting to assault the woman, for which he would have the charges dropped after his father reportedly paid off the victim. Sagawa never made it known to his father or the police that he was actually attempting to consume the woman's flesh. Ultimately, he would end up going on to graduate from the university and would even later go to university in order to obtain a master's degree in English literature. Sagawa likely pursued this since he seemed to have a love for books and writing, finding himself often spending large amounts of time in the library. It was also around this time, as a small child, only in the first grade, that Sagawa reportedly felt his first cannibalistic urges when he saw the thigh of one of his fellow male students, and reportedly thought to himself, that looks delicious. He also claims to have begun to develop a pretty intense obsession with women, especially women like actress Grace Kelly, a woman he says is the exact opposite of him, this ultimately feeding into his inferiority complex. As these feelings and urges grew, and he made it to and graduated from high school, they began to become more sexual in nature. He says he would fantasize not necessarily about eating the person, but just about the desire to chew on their flesh. This, of course, ultimately leads to what we have already discussed of his attempt to steal a piece of a German woman. After moving to Paris to further his studies and pursue a PhD, these feelings, again, only seem to intensify. Sagawa, in an interview, claims to have brought prostitutes home with him hundreds of times, and each time while they were washing with their backs turned to him, he would aim a weapon at them, but every time failed to pull the trigger. Eventually, this began to become less about cannibalism and more so the strong desire to go through with the plans, to invite a woman home to his apartment and kill them. Now 32, Sagawa would befriend fellow classmate 25-year-old Renee Hartfeldt, the woman who would eventually become his victim. According to Sagawa, she stood out to him because, unlike the French women he knew, who he claims were stuck up, Renee was friendly and warm. He would actually invite her over to his home on several occasions, often for dinner, and like the prostitutes, Sagawa would hold the weapon behind her, but ultimately fail to fire it. It is unknown exactly if the two had any kind of a relationship, but given what would happen next, I believe the answer is very highly likely no, they did not have a relationship. Which is why eventually, Sagawa would pull the trigger. Only, the weapon didn't fire. He, like the other times, managed to hide this attempt on Renee's life, but now he knew that he had the ability to do what he believed needed to be done. He invited Renee over to his house again on the 11th of June for dinner and to complete a school assignment of translating poetry together. And that evening, while Renee read the assignment, Sagawa would pull the trigger, and unlike last time, the weapon wouldn't jam and Renee would be killed. Reportedly, Sagawa felt immediate regret for his actions, not only knowing the consequences and likely the punishment for what he had just done, but that he claims to have actually liked Renee and saw her as a friend, not just a victim. However, now standing before her dead body, he also claims to have realized that there was no point in not going through with his plan. To start, he would assault Renee's body and remove parts of her flesh starting with the butt, and consume them raw, taking photos throughout the process. A disturbing fact about his actions is that he had actually attempted to bite into her flesh, but ultimately found that due to the fact that his teeth were not sharp enough, he could not actually break the skin. As a result, Sagawa would leave the apartment, go to a local store, and purchase a butcher knife before returning back to his apartment. According to some French articles, Sagawa reportedly consumed parts of her breasts, butt, thighs, feet, and face, sometimes cooked, sometimes raw. In an interview with Vice, however, I believe Sagawa claims to have only eaten the flesh raw. Although he would save some parts that he was intending to eat later, Sagawa did not have a very elaborate plan for how he was going to preserve the body, and as a result, what was left began to decompose. In an effort to hide his crimes, Sagawa would attempt to dump what was left in 2 suitcases and throw them into the lake of a nearby park. He would make the first drop successfully, but be caught by police before he attempted to drop the second suitcase only about 4 days later. This time, his father's wealthy influence could only take him so far, and although he was provided with a lawyer thanks to help from his father's money, he would still spend around 2 years behind bars as they prepared for his trial. Sagawa would spend a large portion of this time speaking to various individuals, including Inahiko Yamota, an author who would interview Sagawa and write about his side of the story. In a weird sort of way, this would actually end up bringing Sagawa into national fame after it was published in Japan under the name In the Fog. This newfound fame would actually weigh heavily on the French justice system, and after the 2 years he spent behind bars, Sagawa would be declared unfit to stand trial in France, and in a bid to get him out of France, they would extradite him back to Japan. When he arrived in Japan, he was checked into a mental hospital, but there was a weird catch. Since the charges had essentially been dropped in France, and the information about the case was not provided to the Japanese authorities, they technically did not actually have the legal right to detain Sagawa, ultimately meaning that his stay in Matsuzawa Hospital in Tokyo was completely voluntary. During this time, professionals would state that they believed his actions were motivated by sexual perversions and would, unlike French professionals, declare Sagawa sane. On August 12, 1986, Sagawa would check himself out of the hospital and was a free man for the rest of his life. Sagawa would end up capitalizing on his strange and disturbing fame, with one site even claiming that he wrote upwards of 18 books about his murder. He would write food reviews for magazines. He would be included in several movies, usually by directors looking to shake up the movie industry by making the most controversial pictures they can. This most famously included the work known as The Bedroom, in which Sagawa played a creepy man who would spy on women through hidden cameras. This would go to the extreme in which Sagawa would create actual pornography, including an extremely disturbing one in which he would spend a weekend with a woman, and at the end, after they had already had sex, likely multiple times, they would tell the woman about the crimes he committed and film her reaction.
妄想があんなにすごい妄想になっちゃうのも妄想を大きくしちゃうっていうの自分勝手っていうかなんかやっぱりどっか欠けてるというか、私は今自分にとってすごくショックな、
However, time would move on, and people would forget about Sagawa, or simply get bored with the gimmick he was trying to portray his crimes as. Eventually, the magazine would no longer want to publish his reviews, no one would want to publish his books, and no directors were calling to have him star in their films. He would attempt to get jobs, but would often be turned away at just the sight of his name. One college that was considering hiring him after they were impressed by him not attempting to cover his identity would choose not to do so after their possible decision was met with great backlash. By 2005, both Sagawa's parents had passed away, and he was reportedly not even allowed to attend the funeral, likely by other family members who did not wish to have him present. In 2011, Sagawa would state in an interview with Vice that, quote, being forced to make a living while being known as a murderer and a cannibal was a terrible punishment. Eventually, his health would begin to decline, and he required daily assistance, despite the fact that he never married and lived alone. Part of his assistance was given by Sagawa's younger brother, one of the only individuals related to him known to still be in contact with him. and it was to him that Sagawa would finally admit that he regretted the fact that he allowed this obsession to take over his life, even after his horrible crimes were committed. On November 24th, 2022, at the age of 73, Issei Sagawa died as a result of complications from pneumonia. Of course, Sagawa's crimes and subsequent freedom, profit, and fame as the result of said crimes were highly controversial and led many to criticize his very existence. I could not find any information on his victim, Renee, and her family, only a blog post without citation claiming they disagreed with Sagawa's decision to publish his stories. Well, that's it for now. Please consider liking the video to help the algorithm and subscribing to see more content like it. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out this one, where I talk about 5 banned videos you aren't allowed to watch. I'll see you next time.